Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear Professor Rathkolb, many thanks for being here, many thanks for having organized this event. A warm welcome in our museum. Thank you for joining us tonight, and it is a privilege to host such a gathering of distinguished scholars, actors, and engaged citizens in our museum, a place dedicated to the understanding of Europe's shared past and to encouraging debate over its future. In our museum, with its permanent exhibition on 19th and 20th century history, visitors can apprehend the changing history of democracy in Europe. An interactive station on the third floor, for example, called The Rise and Fall of Democracy, shows how parliamentary democracies, mostly newly founded after World War I, deteriorated into authoritarian, fascist, communist, or totalitarian regimes within only 20 years. On the other hand, we also show in our exhibition how decades later, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, we came to a situation in Europe in which more Europeans were living in democratic states than ever before. Today, however, there is growing concern. Across Europe and indeed globally, democracy is under attack. Electoral integrity, juridical independence, media pluralism, and civil liberties are all under increasing strain. The 2024 Democracy Index, published by the Economist Intelligence Unit in February, paints a sobering picture. While several European countries still rank very high, some EU member states have indeed slid into the category of, I'm quoting, flawed democracy or hybrid regimes. So how do we raise democratic awareness? Education and public engagement, like this evening, research and academic discussions are certainly tools to go forward. In our museum, we have created a tablet-guided tour about the history of democracy, and an engaging tour for our visitors about the pursuit of democracy, and we try to raise awareness of our visitors that democracy can only be achieved and maintained through the active, thoughtful, and responsible participation of its citizens. Some democracies on our continent are less than a generation old, so we should nurture them so that they grow even more mature when they age. And the research you have carried out and which will be discussed today help us sharpen our senses for the necessity to intensify our efforts. In that sense, I thank you very much for being here tonight, and I wish you all a fruitful and thought-provoking debate. And I would like to tell everybody that this discussion is being recorded so that we can reach more audiences after the event. So that's for your information. Thank you very much for listening, and I now hand over to the next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Sybille Steinbacher, and it's a great pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you this evening, and I do so especially on behalf of my colleague, Professor Oliver Rathkolb. We both would like to thank Dr. Constanze Itzel and her team for making this event here at the House of European History in this wonderful museum possible. This evening you can expect a panel discussion and a literary reading. The occasion is the publication of this book entitled Authoritarian Trends and Parliamentary Democracy in Europe. It came out in April this year, and it is initiated by Oliver Rathkolb, and I had the pleasure of editing it together with him. The book is published by Waldstein Publishers in Göttingen, Germany, and it is supported by the Vienna Institute for Cultural and Contemporary History and Arts, with financial contributions by the Alfred Landecker Foundation, the Fritz Bauer Institute in Frankfurt am Main, the Faculty of Historical and Cultural Studies at the University of Vienna, the City of Vienna, the National Fund of the Republic of Austria for Victims of National Socialism, and the Future Fund of the Republic of Austria. We would like to thank all these institutions, and especially Ms. Anna-Theresa Kölcher for her support on the part of the Waldstein Publishers. The book is based on surveys in 8 European countries and shows that anti-democratic attitudes have recently become increasingly widespread. The results raise the worrying question of whether Europe is gradually moving away from democracy. More and more people, it seems, are turning away from it and want a change to authoritarian forms of government. For the representative surveys on which our book is based, interviews were first conducted in the fall of 2019, and then, in the wake of the COVID pandemic, again in the fall of 2022 in France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Poland, Austria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Germany. In Italy and France in 2022, more than 40% were in favor of an authoritarian form of rule. It means a state without elections and without parliament, but with a so-called strong leader. The book discusses and compares the results of the surveys. It analyzes the causes and develops strategies on how to strengthen democratic awareness in Europe in the future. It is striking that under the impression of the pandemic experiences, approval of a so-called strong leader increased significantly in all countries involved. It is also clear that parties and politicians are not held in high regard in any country. It is often said that they only look after, citation, the interests of the rich and powerful. This shows that trust in elected political representative, which is the basis of democracy, has been shaken. An alarmingly large number of respondents also believe that they have no say whatsoever in how their government acts. Political apathy makes people susceptible to simplistic answers, blame, resentment, and enemy stereotypes, which are cultivated in authoritarian systems. The results of the two surveys were presented at a matinee at the Burgtheater Vienna in March last year, in March 2024. The matinee was not just about figures and findings, but rather the results were also embedded in literary approaches to the topic in order to capture the reality of life. Renowned authors from the 8 countries wrote texts on the state of democracy, and actors from the Burgtheater performed the texts. Tonight's presentation will take place in a similar way. It will begin with the reading of the texts by young European authors, read by 2 actors from the Burgtheater in Vienna. This will be followed by a first panel discussion in which the reasons for the dissatisfaction with democracy in Europe will be considered, as well as strategies for doing something about the rise in authoritarian attitudes and the widespread loss of trust in democracy. This will be followed by another reading of literary texts and then a second round on the podium. The event will conclude with the last of the all-in-all 9 literary texts. I wish you all now an interesting and enlightening evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to Brussels, to this wonderful museum, the House of European History. And may I now hand over to the evening's moderator, Professor Steven van Hecke. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before we start the panel debate, there is something more interesting that is starting, right? The first round of reading, right? If I look close at my program. So please, you both have the floor.
Jean-Baptiste Delamot, The Pack. Call us as you wish. If we ever bore a name, we forgot it. If this name has ever appeared on a birth certificate, a passport, we've lost it. Perhaps it has sunk into the belly of the sea. Perhaps a smuggler kept it to blackmail us. We change our names as we please. Sometimes we are given one at random: Shorty, the lame, Nuthead, Maradona, Chief, Redskins, Ballsy. Our identity no longer resides in our individuality, but in the pack we form together. This is how they call us around here. They say we are dogs, stray dogs. We are those of the packs, those of the margins of your summer residences, of your apartments with sea view, of your homes with their entry codes. Sometimes you hear us howling like wolves until the early hours of the morning in a crash of broken bottles, kicking into your garbage containers, your billboards, and then you tremble with fear behind your windows in your deep beds, worried about the threat we could represent for your little savings so duly, so fiercely piled up. We retreat at dawn, vanishing as quickly as the shadows dissipated by the rising day. We return to our borders, those that you have consciously established, consecrated by your architectures, those to which you assign our conditional freedom. We later plunge into the rough day whose bite we experience on our shoulders. We walk on the beaches, through agavas of prickly pear trees, along dusty no-man's land littered with cinder blocks, carcasses of household appliances, and shards of bottles. We stick our chest out and stretch the muscles of our arms. There's nothing else to do but play, war, or love. We grab our genitals when talking about girls, those seen in the city, those who will one day marry us. We dry half naked in the rocks, passing a bottle of lukewarm Coke or a smuggled cigarette from hand to hand, from lips to lips. We smoke while looking out beyond the sea to the land we have left, or to the one we promise ourselves we will reach. For our old hopes are still moving. Neither the heat, nor the dust, nor boredom have worn them out. We whisper promises, oaths, and then spit on the sand. Hunger twisting our stomachs, we put an arm over a shoulder. We hold each other by the waist and walk at the same pace. We are now one, obscurely struck by a binding feeling of fraternity, by the majesty conferred to us by our youth, by our irreducible freedom, our savagery.
Fascism and Populism by Antonio Scurati. Populism is a vague generic word, often used imprecisely, sometimes even equivocally. A word amulet resorted to for linguistic exorcisms when faced with an elusive, disturbing, phantasmal, and threatening reality. We carry it around in procession, as was once done with the statue of the patron saint in the villages of the south, in the face of a cataclysm or famine. We must handle it with caution and even sparingly. For my part now, for several years, as I have been striving to understand Mussolini narratively from the point of view of a 21st century writer, I have seen certain characteristics take shape that define the political physiognomy of populism and especially the shape of its leadership. I will therefore try to identify some rules of today's sovereignist populism that echo Mussolini's fascist populism. First rule of populism: the populist leader states, "I am the people." And conversely, with a kind of logical grammatical cramp, he affirms, "The people are me." This omnivorous I precedes every thought, argument, political program. It entails a very strong personalistic accentuation. This first rule of populism carries with it a strong anti-parliamentary polemic. We will see it again at the end because, of course, Parliament represents the multitude in singular multiplicity, the thousand differences, the many positions, one against the other, adversary, distinct, irreducible. But if I am the people, and the people are me, Parliament is a waste of time. It is a place of corruption, of pathological degeneration, of useless, chronic chaos.
The second law of populism invented by Benito Mussolini is leading by following. Mussolini had a formidable insight into what politics will become in the age of the masses, which was then beginning and now continues in its mature phase. He understands that the masses will be led by a leader who will not precede them, who will not stand in front of them, as the English word leader would suggest. They will be instead in the domain of that leader, capable of leading the masses by following them, standing one step behind them. The founder of fascism proudly said of himself, "I am the man of the after." That is, I arrive a moment later on the scene of the political event. I do not proceed, I follow it. It was precisely this navigation by sight that made him a winner. If you are empty, in fact, if you have no principles, no beliefs, no loyalty, no ideas, in politics you are tactically a winner. You are a winner because that empty vessel is filled with what you hear, smell, perceive by standing behind, coming a moment later. If you follow a crowd, if you come a moment after the crowd, if you stand one step behind it, what do you perceive of it? The ideas, the hopes, the feelings encapsulated in facial expressions? No, those are all up front. You sense the moods, the ones you pick up with your nose, not with your head, not even with your heart, with your nose. And Mussolini knew this. He said to himself, "There's nothing to it. I'm like an animal. I sense the weather coming." But when you reduce life to its moods, you always reduce it to its discontents. And what is the dominant discontent in life reduced to its moods? Fear. Fear and resentment. Here is the third rule. A populist leader practices a politics of fear, another far-sighted idea of the populist Mussolini.
And here comes the winning game plan, and it is the fourth point. It is entitled Brutal Simplification of Modern Life. Mussolini realized that his contemporaries felt crushed by the enormous complexity of modern life. And he understood something else. Fascism not only has at its disposal the violence that annihilates the opponent physically, it can also avail itself of the brutalization of political life that annihilates thought, because this is of enormous relief to the masses. And in fact, the propaganda is this. Reality is not as complex as the old liberals who preach the idea of proportional parliamentary representation claim. Reality is much simpler. Everything is reducible to a single problem. That single problem is reducible to an enemy. That enemy is identified in a foreigner, invading foreigner. The invading foreigner is killable. Problem solved. What a sigh of relief. Life is so simple. All you have to do is hate the socialist. Here at my side, the fascist with his truncheon ready to beat him up. What is the point of Parliament with its laborious complexity? The differences between today's sovereignist populists and Mussolini's fascist nationalists are many and crucial, starting with the systematic use of physical violence. But what they have in common is the threat to the quality and fullness of democratic life, summed up in the authoritarian centrality of the leader in whom the people would incarnate themselves, the leader who speaks through his own body.
And this is Mussolini's latest far-sighted invention. Already in the 1920s, the Duce was the first to put the body at the center of the political scene. Famous are the images of the shirtless fascist leader threshing wheat among the peasants, swimming, gesticulating in a way that seems grotesque to us. And this generates one of the main misunderstandings about a terrible dictator, too often dismissed as a ridiculous character. Not at all. Even in gesticulating, Mussolini is exercising his evil political genius. He understands that in the age of the masses, political communication will not be from head to head, but will be an almost physical interaction, speaking from the body of the leader to the electoral body. When in fact, the collective life around the country is rooted along this path, and everything is embodied in the body of this type of leader, what happens is that you cannot touch that body. You cannot reach it, you cannot analyze it, above all, you cannot discuss it. You can only adore it, as millions of Italians did with Mussolini, or you can hate it, loathe it and slaughter it, as the Italians did with their Duce at the end of his parable.
Wintertime by Katrin Röckler. The clocks will be turned back tonight, so they say.
So it's the old man from the East, then? Don't say anything now, that's how it is? They've got this poster girl from Cologne, they've got this Identitarian from Austria, they've got these 120 from the Reich, they've got this dentist from Düsseldorf, they've got this middle-class IT entrepreneur, they've got this AfD wing of the army, they've got this judge from Baden-Württemberg, or was it Rhineland-Palatinate, they've got this NRW woman from the Values Union, they've got this member of parliament in Hessen, they've got Hessen, North Hessen, South Hessen, whatever. They've got these adolescents from everywhere.
That's not true.
Oh yeah, they haven't got the adolescents from everywhere. They've only got some of them. The others, we've got here, haven't we? But they've got these farmers, unions, they've got agriculture, they've got the countryside, the vast countryside.
They haven't got the whole countryside.
Yes, they haven't got the whole countryside. They've certainly got Eastern Germany. Look at the polls. 36% here in the East are considering voting for them. And then Bavaria, they've got the countryside in Austria. Look at the polls. They've got the countryside everywhere. The countryside is fascist. And if they haven't got it, then they drive out the other parties. They've got the language. They want sovereignty over discourse. They want to coin terms. They take every tool, every idea from the left and appropriate it. Liberty, homeland, subversive, anti-establishment, thinking, enlightenment, activism, they're hijacking the entire language.
That's not true.
Think of the codes of conduct. They'll be next. Came from Me Too, came from left-wing groups, and now a good instrument of liberal politics. Think of the accusation of anti-Semitism. That too can be an outstanding tool for getting rid of critical voices. Or the concept of liberty, always popular. They enjoy standing up for a liberty that just means crudeness. They enjoy it. They enjoy showing how others have moral double standards. They enjoy accusing others of the idiocy they see everywhere these days.
Well, I don't see anything. Can you be more specific?
I follow this woman on Instagram. I'm on Facebook with this bloke. She poses with tractors. She uses the farmers' demonstrations. She uses the COVID deniers. She uses the esoterics, the naturopaths. They use the critical minds.
Oh, come on.
Come on yourself. If someone is proven to be constantly lying and is considered all the more authentic for it, we've seen that before. Think of Trump. Think of Trump. Think of Trump.
I'm not going to think of Trump. I also know it from a different side altogether.
If someone constantly makes untrue claims so thick and fast you can't keep up to disprove them.
But I also know that in other contexts, simply making claims in quick succession, you're pretty much taught that in any management training seminar.
They say you notice it in one place. They say something's not right here. Let's say the figures aren't right from a demo. And then you read the study, obsessively read the studies. They say they've woken up now. They say we're still sheep. They say now the penny's dropped.
Ah, it hasn't for you yet?
They have the fear. They own all the fear.
Incorrect. They claim we're fear-mongering, that we're the monsters.
That's what I'm saying. They accelerate fear. It's getting even faster, as if there still weren't any evidence, but there's no longer any shortage of pictures. As if you always have to wait for the ultimate proof. Wait until things are guaranteed to turn bad. They say they're the Jews of yesteryear. They say we're shooting, but it's they who have the weapons. They've got all the weapons.
Not all of them have weapons.
They who have the weapons, they ramble on about day X that's coming. They'll be faster. We are always too slow. We're too democratic, while they're rapid.
Authority is rapid. And what will I ask? Say, do you have any pictures? Have you filmed the whole thing? Where are your secret cameras? In the Bundestag? You must admit the picture's still shaky. It isn't lined up properly.
And what are they up to now? Preparing for war? No idea how to put it. It sounds absurd. Somehow storming the parliament, somehow doing something with power cuts, kidnappings and shootings. Target practices, of course, one has to get fit. Look at how they're talking. They're roaring like bears. They're howling like wolves. They're talking like any wild animal they can think of.
If animals could talk.
The clocks will be turned back drastically, so they say, but really drastically. You'll no longer know what time it is.
This time doesn't exist.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sean McDonough and Sylvie Rohr, for bringing a bit of Vienna Burgtheater to Brussels, for introducing the topic, and for already realizing the promise that Constanze Itzel, as a director of the House of European History, made. Food for thought, but we will continue. So please stay with us. As you can see, this is a panel under attack if this would be an authoritarian regime, because it's filled with artists, academics and journalists. Very dangerous. But we are very safe and happy to be here in the House of European History. And thank you also for waiting for 25 minutes before mentioning Donald Trump. So this is like the third part of this evening program, as has been announced. We'll unpack a bit this book, the reason why we are here. Our congratulations on behalf of the other panel members of the two editors. We will not read it, because otherwise you will not have to buy it anymore. So please buy a copy and read it. We will discuss the topic in two different waves, a bit like the title. The first round we will focus on authoritarian trends, and the second on parliamentary democracy in Europe and how to strengthen it. My name is Steven van Hekke. I'm a political scientist at the KU Leuven, University of Leuven, here close by, and also a member of the academic committee of this House of European History. I will first of all introduce the three panel members. Ladies first, Edith Innotai on my right. You're a senior fellow and a board member, and then I have to watch at the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. I will read it twice. As the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy sounds like a whole program for everybody of us in Budapest. Thank you for coming to Brussels. You have both a background in academia, as I understood, and also as a journalist, so that makes you perfectly fit for this panel. Maybe German speakers recognize your face from the ARD, but you're also writing for Balkan Insight. I will immediately give you the floor, but first introduce the other two panel members to the audience. Nathalie Brack, soyez le bienvenue. Nathalie is Professor of Political Science at Cevipol, here at the ULB, Université Libre de Bruxelles, and is also teaching at the College of Europe in Bruges. She's known for her research about European Parliament, radical parties and Euroscepticism, so also perfectly fit for this panel. Last but not least, Oliver Rathkolb, former head of department and professor emeritus at the Department of Contemporary History at the University of Vienna. An impressive CV. For now, I will only mention the most important in this house, as already has been mentioned. You are the chairperson of the academic committee. So thank you for having us, so to say, and also for granting the House the opportunity to present this book about this certainly important topic here in Brussels. Authoritarian trends, and there is no coincidence then that we start with Hungary. It's more than a trend, I'm afraid. It's more a fact. How did it end up like it ended up? Can you explain in a couple of minutes to us?
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And, you know, it's kind of a strange feeling to be here from Hungary. For years, when I participated in debates like that, I was usually the outcast, the strange person coming from Hungary, from a country which is sliding back in democracy, which is becoming a hybrid regime. And, you know, I was trying to share our experiences. Well, guess what? Now we are not the outcasts anymore. The word is kind of following, unfortunately, the footsteps of Prime Minister Orban, who is very happy and proud about that, actually. So how did it all happen? And perhaps, you know, I can give you some ideas how to avoid this happening in other countries. You know, just keeping in mind that every country is, of course, different. So Viktor Orban was elected in 2010. That was actually his second term because he served previously and he fell. But when he came back in power, that was a very, very difficult time in Hungary. He capitalized a lot on public dissatisfaction. It was the collapse of a social liberal government which mismanaged the economy for several years in Hungary, and they could not just face the challenge of the financial crisis. It was a government of a prime minister who admitted that he was lying day and night to win the elections in 2006. So you can imagine how low the trust in democracy and politicians were in Hungary. So there came Viktor Orban. So I think one point is crucial, this dissatisfaction. We have that in a number of countries. We can argue about whether that's a justified dissatisfaction with our living standards, or it's just a perception, or it's exaggerated, but I think that's another debate. So there came Viktor Orban as the savior. This is very typical for autocratic parties or radical parties. They promise to save the country and the society from all kinds of woes and difficulties and problems. And he actually he achieved a landslide victory at this first election. This was truly a huge victory, over 50%. And with that, he managed to have 2/3 majority in the parliament, which is pretty much unprecedented. And in the next, how many elections did we have? He had 4 elections in a row, all won by landslide majority. This is not always 50%, but even with 42, 43%, you can have 2/3 majority in the parliament. This is one of the weaknesses of the Hungarian system. And then when he established himself in power, it's really interesting that, you know, he promised very fast changes. When you rule alone in a country, you can promise basically everything. And I think that's another, specialty of the Hungarian political system. This might not happen in other countries, that he could actually rule without a coalition, alone, for 15 years now. And I think, he actually also capitalized on this expectation of a large majority of the public to get things done very fast. We live in a very fast speed society. Everybody wants instant changes. You want, instant gratification. We talk a lot about that. And this is what Orban also understood, that people want changes very fast. But that, of course, means that you don't need parliamentary debate. You don't need any democratic discourse. You don't need checks and balances. You just, go and shoot through. So this is the way he governs. He actually, I would say he rules, he doesn't govern. That's another peculiarity of those autocratic systems. And I think I will stop here because I don't want to get into like a long lecture. I could talk, of course, hours about the Hungarian system, but let's stop for a minute now.
No, but not yet, because you made us curious for the recipe. What we all know is that Viktor Orbán used his 2/3 majority not only to stay in power, but also to change the constitution and the electoral system. As a political scientist, I'm not a lawyer, nobody is perfect. As a political scientist, I would say changing the electoral system in your benefit is even more dangerous than changing the constitution. Would you agree that also makes it much more difficult to have a government change next year?
Absolutely. So I think this is why it's important that when you have autocratic parties in opposition, that's bad enough. But the situation gets very threatening when they come to government, because they will do everything to consolidate their power, to consolidate their rule, and not let anybody else govern in this country. And you know, we have serious doubts. We will have elections next year, but there is a lot of speculation nowadays in Hungary whether those elections will be allowed, whether the leading candidate of the opposition party, which is the new emerging party, whether he will be kind of, you know, maybe detained or arrested or intimidated or kind of, you know, kicked out of the system. So that's the consequence of the system where we live, which actually, you know, abolished all checks and balances in the last 15 years. So it started with the constitution, with the electoral law, then the media. You know, as a journalist, I think it's very important to mention that the media is under unprecedented pressure. Nowadays in Hungary, there is a new law that the government tabled recently, which would cut all funding for critical media outlets coming from outside of Hungary, but even inside Hungary, that would be very difficult, even to donate money to independent media outlets. And this is happening, you know, less than 1 year before the elections. So we are under pressure. There is an attack on everybody who is, you know, criticizing a government. And, you know, those people, media, civil society people, lawyers, are called basically traitors and, you know, people who harm the national sovereignty of Hungary, which is something that the government decides what national sovereignty is.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to France. Also critical elections there in 2027. Already a lot of speculation, but of course we are not going to comment just on what is in the newspaper of yesterday. Nathalie, can you share with us your insights as far as the rise of authoritarian trends is concerned in France?
Yes, so for me, it's a long process, so it's not as bad as in Hungary in the sense that the main party, the Rassemblement National, is still in the opposition, but it's the dominating opposition fueling discontent among people in France. And it is slowly becoming the leader of the ideological debate. And it's an interesting case in France because I think it illustrates the danger of that kind of party, and that we are going from a fading consensus on the importance of liberal democracy to a growing dissensus and a conflict about either the functioning of democracy or, in the case of France, the implementation of democracy. And what we see when I was looking at the chapter on France on what people think, they still remain very much attached to the ideal of democracy as a regime, but they're strongly critical of the implementation, the lack of efficiency they're attracted by a strong leader because it's quicker, because it seems that they bring easy solution in a world where it's increasingly complex, and they feel powerless and disconnected from not only politicians, but also judiciary institution, or even the lack of trust in the media. And they even feel that their own politicians are powerless in the world of today. And what has changed in France, I think it's an incredible example for other parties is the strategy of the party in fueling this discontent and changing its image among society and becoming normalized and accepted, whereas before it was still a party associated with anti-Semitism and very radical image that people would not vote for them. We saw last year how many people passed that step. And for me, it's really a long-term strategy that they put in place, and that they change their strategy from a blunt opposition to the system to reform from the inside and appearing very credible as a potential government or governmental party. But also they reappropriate democratic values and they pretend to be the true defenders of people and people's democracy in opposition to multiculturalism and political liberalism. And in the world of today, I think it's particularly dangerous with geopolitics because Trump seems to act as a cement for that kind of ideas. And we see everywhere in Europe, including in France, a structuration along transnational links and international links through the creation or adoption of ideas and the contamination across parties from that political family with identitarian narratives and conspiratorial discourse, which one of the texts was referring to, online and offline. And that kind of strategy is very much present in the strategy of the Populist Party in France.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. Indeed, I think in France we see a kind of a mainstreaming of the radical right in order to gain power as they wish in 2 years. Maybe a small follow-up question, because what France maybe distinguishes from other member states of the EU is that you also have authoritarian trends at the very left. You have this tribune at Mélenchon. Is that just the same, or should we really distinguish when looking with eyes of authoritarianism?
I think it's still a difference in the way they see democracy. They're populist in the same way. They pretend both to speak on behalf of the people. They're very critical of, for instance, threats to the nation, but they interpret the nation differently in a less exclusionary way. So it's not about the invaders, more about economic powers or working people, but not so much based on race or origin, or and it's perhaps a bit less polarizing effects also on institution, less delegitimization of the institution, which makes it different, but it fits also France and its idea of nationalism that has always been present, and also like in Europe as a way to defend France's interests, which is particular to France's idea of the nation.
Okay, thank you. We move back to Central Europe because we're also going to focus on Austria, the country you probably know best. Professor Rathkolb, I will not dig too much into 20th century history. Let's make it a bit pleasant. But I do remember that the first real crisis from a party political point of view within the European Union was, of course, that the FPÖ for the first time became a coalition partner under Chancellor Schüssel. And then even our foreign affairs minister asked the public opinion in Belgium not to go skiing in Austria. And therefore, we have Article 7 in the Treaty on the European Union. Well, a long history. Currently, or recently, the FPÖ did not manage to get into the government, but please also give your insights on overall trends as far as the rise of authoritarianism is concerned, with a particular focus on Austria.
Thank you very much also for focusing on the year 2000. You're absolutely right. Austria is even a forerunner with regard to right-wing populism and extremism, as even long before Hungary, as if we exclude the communist era here. Let me put it very bluntly on the exceptions in Austria, which I call also a paradoxon in European history. I think one of the reasons why the Freedoms Party has ruled twice in coalitions and already in 1970 supported the social democratic government of Bruno Kreisky, has something to do with a unique decision of the allies in Austria, which is quite different to Western allied policies in Germany. Yeah? They pushed hard in accepting an open right-wing party which was doing nothing else than trying to collect votes from former Nazi party members by really also addressing very openly that the former Nazi party members have been victims of the post-45 regime. And that's a big difference to the Federal Republic of Germany. Yeah? If you compare the FDP, which was in the beginning quite right, but you can't compare them. It really developed into a liberal party, and the Freedoms Party never made it, although they tried hard, especially when they joined government with the Social Democrats in 83. That means we have a long tradition. I think the longest tradition also when you compare it with France, for example, or other countries in Europe. The second issue is what we tried using our public opinion polls is, and which very much correlates to the work of the House of European History here, that we try to prove that history matters. Yeah? We had questions all out Europe concerning a critical view with regard to national history, asking, for example, the Hungarians what they think about the authoritarian regime of Horthy and the Austrians about Dollfuss. And you clearly can see if you combine authoritarian attitudes and a very nationalistic, uncritical view of history, they correlate. And that's also the reason why, especially in Hungary, but not only in Hungary, in all countries where you have extreme right-wing parties, they will try to observe the interpretation of history. Because this is also an emotional deal. And here I think also Austria is an important country because for decades until 1986, the Waldheim debate and later on, we really thought that we are the victims of German aggression in 1938. And it took us very long also to come to terms with the fact that certainly the Austrians were an important element of Nazi aggression against Europe and an even more important part in the Holocaust. That means, I think, this combination, having a very early party, and it took very long to cope with nationalistic views and issues, is one of the reasons why Austria is a particular case, and why also the Freedoms Party still is very strong, despite the fact that they have scandals. They are not really very efficient in government, in coalition government, but in September last year, they gained 29% of the votes, and the coalition talks with the People's Party only ended because Kickl wanted too much. Yeah, he was not Haider in 2000, who very cleverly retreated and then more or less pushed the government. Just to stop here, I think Austria has a very long tradition. It also has something to do with a very authoritarian period in the Habsburg monarchy, with a dictatorship before the Nazi dictatorship of Dollfuss and Schuschnigg, and a very difficult point to come to terms with the past. The last point, which very well correlates what we already heard for Hungary and France, and also in the reading, is that you really can see authoritarian trends in Austria are always strong when you have times of social crisis, of transformation. in Austria, push factor for the right-wing groups are the provinces. They are now in a large number of coalition governments on the provincial level, like in Salzburg, Upper Austria, Styria. They even have now the governor and so on. That means there is also, I think, an important issue which we then come back in the discussion, that one of the key problems I see all over Europe is that the European federal governments and political main parties really forgot the lessons of the success story after 1945. Social cohesion, economic planning, including the countryside, not just the booming urban centers. And I think that's a key we can later on discuss.
Certainly. Thank you also for making links to the other cases already mentioned, almost even the Treaty of Trianon, right? History is always there. That's why it's such a great thing also to have this panel discussion here. I just wanted to ask one follow-up question about the role of Germany. You presented it indeed. That's the tragic role of Germany in the 20th century. But recently, I guess also because of there is no language threshold between Austria and Germany. It's like a bit in Flanders. You also look with different eyes to the Netherlands. Also, when it comes to the far right, does Germany have a positive impact now on trying to prevent authoritarianism on the rise in Austria?
No, in the opposite. Yeah, okay. The AfD, like Trump, by the way, I have to mention his name. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, this has an incredible impact on the voters because in previous days, the Germans were the good guys, yeah, dealing very critical with the Shoah, with the Holocaust, the responsibility of Germany vis-a-vis the state of Israel, yeah. And we were the bad guys. And that's completely changed now. And it's pushing. And you can clearly see that right now within the European Union, we already have an interesting triangle, very effective, yeah? Unfortunately, not really seen by the Europeans between Germany, AfD, Austria, FPÖ, and Hungary, Orban. And that's also the reason why the FPÖ first president of the parliament, his first official state guest was Orban. It's a clear sign. And I think this triangle, if France, yeah, also would increase and Mrs. Le Pen comes into power, I think these four centers of deep-rooted authoritarian political parties will be really becoming an effective group in Europe.
Okay, thank you. I was also pointing at the role of the politicians, what kind of strategy they develop, because the German strategy still is different from the Austrian, but that's for the second round. If the audience find itself a bit pessimistic, no worries. We have now a second round of reading of excellent texts. And in the second round of the panel, we'll provide you with all kinds of solutions to strengthen European democracy. But first, again, Sylvia and Sean, please have the floor.
A Double Head by Sabine Gruber. I was born with a large head.
Perhaps I realized before I was even born that a large cranium could be only an advantage in that homeland of mine alongside a border. When beholding it, nobody could ever take it for a round or pointed head. The head was so big that its shape didn't matter. It had enough room for two heads. I was baptized while still at the hospital and given the name Sabina, which etymologically bears no relation to a big head. According to the legend, Sabina was a Roman noblewoman who was converted to Christianity by her slave Serapia. In the end, both their heads got the job. First, the slave was arrested and beheaded, followed a few years later by her martyred mistress, my namesake. Today, I don't believe it was a coincidence that I, with my large head, was given the name of a decapitated lady, and that I was named after a Roman aristocrat and not after Margarete Maultasch, the sole heiress of Tyrol, even though I was born less than 5 kilometers from Tyrol Castle as the crow flies. The registrar may have been a sympathizer of the Bumse, the South Tyrolean Liberation Committee, those violent South Tyrol activists who championed the separation of South Tyrol from Italy. Or perhaps he had himself been a victim of Mussolini's Italianization policies. Nobody knows for sure today. But I was told the official shook his head when looking at my baptismal certificate and without a second's hesitation turned the final vowel from an A into an E. The kid is not Italian after all. In this way, a Germanic head was dropped atop the beheaded Roman lady, and my father, overwhelmed with paternal joy and unable to think clearly, raised no protest. In the 1960s, everything was painstakingly separated in South Tyrol. Everything was suspect, even individual letters of the alphabet. Accordingly, even though my mother was friends with an Italian woman who had a son my age, she was in no doubt that I should attend the German-speaking kindergarten, whilst her Italian friend's child, who had become my best pal, would attend the Asilo Italiano. She had not reckoned with my head. The story goes that at enrollment, I threw myself on the floor screaming and only calmed down after I was promised that I would not be separated from my Italian chum. Consequently, the fair and curly-haired child donned a dark grey standard issue pinafore and henceforth fervently sang Giro, giro tondo, gira il mondo. Although, according to the prognostications of the German-speaking cultural and educational separatists, the little girl's world and language should have fallen to pieces in line with the last verse of the aforementioned nursery rhyme, Giro, giro tondo, casca il mondo, and although her parents had been told that the early change of language would leave her with a muddled identity and corrupt her mother tongue, she soon wrote the best German essays and later became a writer. While the real world saw fences being put up in school playgrounds and bans on exchange lessons between German and Italian-speaking schools, the child created her own world, inventing German and Italian-speaking characters, fictitious friends, with whom she played in her head that offered plenty of room for all and sundry. The young woman was not yet of age when the census took place in 1981. Her parents went over her head and declared her to be German-speaking. "You're ruining your future, don't be pig-headed." In 1978, still in my girlhood, I had traveled to Rome to work in a hotel. During my breaks, I visited Saint Sabina, who is laid to rest under the high altar in the eponymous basilica. Whenever possible, I spent time in entirely Italian-speaking cities, moving to Venice for several years after my studies, always in search of that lost letter A, of the other language, of the possibilities of a pluricultural life, of multinational European normality, which should not mean forced assimilation, but acceptance, respect, diversity on the basis of democratic rules, always looking for a hat that fitted. Admittedly, the number of double heads did swell over time. They joined forces, but they are still in the minority. Today, it is no longer the Italians people in this province are afraid of, but rather a few migrants who might taint the village idyll that has been polished to a high sheen for the tourists. Traditional customs and practices and the South Tyrolean identity have long turned into box office hits, a lucrative brand. When Giorgia Meloni and her right-wing party, Fratelli d'Italia, came to power in January 2023, the provincial governor, Armin Kompatscher, once open-minded and in favor of a cosmopolitan and pluralistic South Tyrol, declared that there were still fascists or neo-fascists in Fratelli d'Italia and that his party hence wanted nothing to do with them. The provincial government now includes precisely those that they never wanted to have anything to do with. The radical turn to the right is defended by citing the expansion of autonomy and Meloni's promise to restore lost prerogatives. The Fratelli d'Italia are following the fascist tradition, and their national conservatism is anything but minority-friendly. I was born with a big head. It's not big enough.
Theresia Mora, Essay on Mud. In my memory, I'm wearing wellies for the ankle-high mud and sunglasses for the blinding sun. In this attire, I come down from the vineyard, from the edge of the wood to the shore of the lake. I walk at right angles to the paths of the red stags and hinds, which are also stags, small stags. First woodland, then wine, then meadow, then pasture, then reeds, and a canal leading in a straight line to the lake, a tarmac path beside it. A hollow in the path where the barrier used to be and the border guards stood. Later, the bus stopped here before going on to the Lido, the stilt houses with reed thatching and a little harbour. Now, temporary fencing runs along here, a barrier, a caravan, 2 watchmen, a board on the bank of the canal. Doesn't tell me who has been building what here, since when and with whose support, just how they imagine it will look. 2 big marinas, a 4-star hotel, 24 holiday homes, car parks, tennis courts, golf courses, helipads, rocket launch pads, serpentariums, terrariums, dolphinariums, sharkariums. There's also supposed to be a Lido again, a lawn for sunbathing, parasols, gravel, where you enter the water before it returns to ankle-high, then knee-high mud. No one goes further out on foot. What it doesn't say anywhere, but what we know, is that they've been building and working on it for 3 years. Already 4? A state investment. That is, they're building as long as they receive money from abroad, the EU. That also means that they don't communicate with anyone, that nothing is transparent, and that they don't take into consideration environmental requirements, that tenants were dispossessed and the cost of dispossessing them was quietly passed on to them. One day, the majority of the stilt houses burnt down. I stress that the latter stands in a separate sentence. Now, I'm standing there in wellies with sunglasses, next to me the board with the meaningless graphics, before me the barrier and the fencing and 2 watchmen. They're tall, fat men in T-shirts and shorts, their arms and legs tattooed. I do what I always do when I start up a conversation with someone in Hungary. I act as if I know nothing. When I do this, my voice is higher than when I feel secure. So I ask in the woman's voice of an unknowing stranger when one will be able to get to the lake again. Neither of the tattooed giants know. The construction work is progressing only slowly, unfortunately. Oh, why is that? Because of all the mud. And where does all this mud come from? From Austria. But they knew back then in Versailles how to secure the better part of the lake for themselves, the part with all the water. How? Did they have any say in it? Didn't they lose the First World War? They weren't losers, shouted the muscle-bound giants. They didn't lose anything. They even won something. They left us with all the mud. I just say, pity. Says one of the giants. Hardly anyone uses the beach anyway. I turn back and walk back. I avoid the village. I prefer to walk along the meadows on its edge. I don't want to risk running into the mayor. I still haven't given up to them a filth of my property, which they wanted for free, for a road they might build or might not. True story. Subtitle: The Thieves, the Liars, the Cowards, and the Land.
The Last Day of the War by Michal Chworecki. I no longer remember how I experienced the last days of the war. Lots of people know exactly where they were and what they were doing at the moment the army of occupation unexpectedly started withdrawing from its bases. I couldn't understand at first what was going on when I heard bells tolling and sirens screaming from the steeples and churches in Bratislava, as well as ringing out digitally from mobile apps. What I will never forget is the feeling that swept over me sitting at my computer as the eagerly awaited news reached me. A protracted nightmare seemed at last to have come to an end. The news unleashed a wave of emotion throughout Central Europe. Many had been on tenterhooks, anticipating the announcement. Others were scared. My homeland was teeming with collaborators. There was something in the air. Peace was in sight at last. The enemy government had finally decided to surrender the territories it had seized. Ceasefire! The war is over, screamed the headlines. Thousands streamed into the streets like herds of wild animals. People wept, laughed, drank, and danced through the rest of the day and the night, and continued into the following night and the one after that. It seemed that the party would never end. My city was in a state of feverish excitement. How long I had yearned for this day, and yet, while the masses in the streets cheered, I felt as if a mass grave had burst open. I couldn't weep or laugh. I couldn't drink or dance. I was like a sleepwalker who had lost her bearings. I felt lonely. For me, the war was not over. It was as if the propaganda had poisoned me with distrust that I was unable to shake. Fighting with arms may have been over, but surely it would continue with the help of fake images, films, and news, the enemy's main strategy for many years. We had lost the war as well as the truth before we fully realized that the war was being waged. I was no longer able to quickly detect a sophisticated hate message and would let it sneak into my head and take over my thoughts. It would be a while before people stopped looking for a leader who would inspire the kind of ideas and spur them to the kind of action they would have dismissed as sheer lunacy if it had come from anyone else. His brain was a genius of destruction. Over the following days, many of our people returned home. But you were not among them. Since you had gone, I hadn't been able to write. I couldn't manage a single paragraph, or even a single line or word for years. Instead of writing, I would just read. After a few months, I was no longer able to read either, no longer able to take stories that were made up. What was the point of all those fictional stories if they taught no one anything, either about the past or about the future? After the winter counteroffensive ended, I was no longer able to think straight. How was I to live alongside a generation that had been inculcated with barbarism? What if there wasn't a single uncontaminated thought left in their heads? I no longer knew where I was coming from or how I was supposed to go on living and working. One day, after what seemed like an eternity, I glanced at my bookcase and picked up a collection of poems that I'd been meaning to read for years, but couldn't bring myself to. I closed the window, and my empty room fell silent. Years ago, some poets had written about this last day too, about the end of the war we all longed for and which was bound to come. This is how I experienced the last days of the war, by reading about them, listening to their sound, and dreaming.
Thank you so much. As promised, in the second round with this distinguished panel, we'll look to the future, leave the past and the present as it is, because we are looking for concrete strategies how to reduce authoritarian trends and strengthen parliamentary democracy. If we'll manage, we'll all get very rich because we'll sell all our thoughts to all the consultants, but anyway, we will have a try. And let's start in Hungary. What lessons learned from the Hungarian experience can help other societies, other democracies, Europe as a whole, in trying to reduce authoritarian trends and strengthen our parliamentary democracy? Edith.
Thank you. Well, of course, this is the million-dollar question always asked. I think I would also like to highlight that when we talk about Hungary, it would be a mistake to use Hungary as kind of a shining example, because it's not. So I will be a bit negative here, just do like negative propaganda here. If you look at the Hungarian economic data, it clearly shows that an authoritarian government in Hungary mismanaged the economy. It's a failure. Hungary is falling behind its European peers, is falling behind the Czech Republic, Poland, the Baltic states. Even, Slovakia is in many data leading, and we are falling back to the level of Romania. This is surely not something that the Hungarian public expected from this government. We are suffering under inflation, and we managed to become the most corrupt country in Europe. I mean, these are also the accomplishments of this authoritarian government, which clearly shows that these politicians do not really care for their public. I mean, they just sell themselves as the saviors of the average people. All they care for is their own pocket. In Hungary, the prime minister's son-in-law is the 11th richest person in the country, with almost €500 million of wealth. And this was amassed in the last 15 years. He started from nothing. So this is due to the political system. This is surely not in the interest of the average voters. So this is one thing which I think it's important to show, because we have the same trajectory in the US. This is happening with the Trump family. They don't care about their voters. They care about their own pocket and their own wealth. So I think this is something that could be used as a weapon against autocratic parties. This is how you end up if you elect a government with those people. But more on a positive note, like, a couple of ideas. I think what is really important for mainstream parties, if they are left anywhere in Europe, talk to your voters, go down to the countryside. Do not concentrate on the cities. It's very easy to say, okay, there is this rural-urban divide, and we take the cities, and then we leave the rural areas behind. Talk to the people, go down, listen to their concerns, because those are legitimate concerns, especially when it's about the economy, it's about security. So take those people seriously, because there is this tendency that we do campaigning on social media and that's enough, and we don't talk to our voters or to the public. That's a failure. Try to create communities. I think that's a lesson we can learn from Orban and Fidesz, because this is why they are so hugely successful, or they used to be so hugely successful, because they were very good in community building. talking to people, organizing events, caring for people. This is something that mainstream parties or leftist parties can also learn. And perhaps last, a note on the media. It's very important to care for the media, to, to donate, to subscribe to independent news sites, because, in any system, if you don't have an independent media, you will end up, like Putin or China. So that's a very scary thing. And I think that's also a wake-up call for a lot of business leaders to take media and civil society seriously. This is like, a last wake-up call, because politicians use social media very shrewdly. They communicate with people directly without having to answer questions or, getting into critical debates. So I think that's a very dangerous development in our communication. So we should avoid, leaving that open for the radical parties.
Thank you. Therefore, your role is very crucial, and we're very happy to have you here as an independent journalist. One follow-up question. The European Parliament, in this famous or infamous, if you want, resolution, defined Hungary as an electoral autocracy. I will not ask you to comment or to evaluate European Parliament. I'm asking you, is this pressure from outside of Hungary helping the state of democracy, or is it rather counterproductive?
Wow. I think, I think it's, no? Yes. It
was the Russian Secret Service.
Yeah. It's
we don't care.
It's the disinfo or the fake, the Russian propaganda. I think actually Orban uses that card very well. He plays that out very shrewdly, and he deliberately brings up topics which will be debated on a European scene, like, banning the Pride, the Budapest Pride. This is definitely an issue which is, a huge problem for right of assembly, for human rights. But he knows that when this is going to be an issue debated in the European Parliament, his voters will rally behind him, because they would say this is not the major issue. And I would say even most Hungarians would say nowadays, with bread and butter issues, that banning the Pride is a huge problem, but this is perhaps not among our three biggest problems in Hungary. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but sometimes I think that all the criticism that comes from the European Union, it just helps Orban to strengthen in Hungary and in the European arena, to get all those radical parties, just cooperate or work with him or strengthen him. I don't know what would be a better approach from the European Union, because there is a lot of expectation in Hungary that, finally the EU will say that that's enough and they will crack down on Orban. But I think the EU is not constructed for that. It's a union of countries which are supposed to be democratic countries. The EU has no idea how to deal with a country which is not democratic anymore. Let's say that. I mean, it's not a democracy anymore. So what do? You kick out Hungary? Well, I would not really advocate that for my own personal reasons. But what are really the instruments the European Union can use against Hungary? I don't know. They froze a lot of money. That makes the economic situation difficult, but still, it does not crack the system. It has to be cracked from inside, from Hungary. And we have to, fight that battle.
Okay, thank you for your honest answer. Nathalie, please continue as far as the situation in France is concerned, but also introduce in your answer your own research. And I guess you also have thought already previously about policy recommendations, as political scientists then call it. What is your take on strategies to reduce authoritarian trends and to strengthen parliamentary democracy?
Yes, again, I don't have the one bullet, but I would like to focus on 4 elements. One that was already mentioned, and it's the economy. I think many things start with social conditions of people. If we think of France, the Gilets jaunes, it was all about economic situation of people that were not heard or felt not heard in Paris. And even though sometimes in some countries, and I think in Belgium as well, we say, oh, but there is no rising inequalities, that's only in the US, but it doesn't matter if it's real or perceived. If people feel like they are, their economic situation is not improving or is not getting better, then it goes back to the thesis of Engelhardt and so on. You don't think about democracy, gender equality, human rights if you feel like you're economic trouble. You need first that, and social cohesion and social policy is crucial. The second thing is authoritarian leaders, they feed on powerlessness, of the feeling of being powerless. So involve more citizens in the decision-making process. Third, and it's related to that, we see in the polls, for instance, the most trusted institutions are the local ones. So especially in countries like France, where it's very much centralized, perhaps decentralization and giving back to people, or in the EU, the subsidiarity principle and trying to see what can be managed at the local level would help. And finally, and that's really from my personal research, is the role of the other parties in the country, and especially the center-right. And where we were in the House here, it was all about cooperation, and usually it's through cooperation that autocratic leaders get some power. And we see in Europe a lot of accommodation, cooptation, and either directly or indirectly. So in France, we see Macron who destroyed the left and the right and saying, well, that cleavage doesn't matter. It's actually all about cosmopolitists versus nationalists. Well, it's giving the ground to Rassemblement National to say, if you don't support that, go and join our rank. So I would say they should start bringing solution to people, but stop debating on the premise that the radical right are proposing, and not bring so much salience to the topic that those parties are discussing, because everywhere they're losing that ground to those actors.
Okay, thank you. And to make things clear, I'll also use the Belgian term. As you know, Belgian politics also very well in both languages. So that means let's keep the cordon sanitaire, the Brandmauer, and all the other language versions that you have.
From a purely academic point of view, the cordon sanitaire works when you don't have a strong radical right. And when it's a total cordon, like in Wallonia, when we have in Belgium, you have the media, the political scene, everything, then it works. Then when the party is already there, is already in the media, is already in parliament, it's sending the wrong message, because it's sending to the people, you are not heard, you don't matter, we don't want to hear what you have to say. So there it's less efficient, and I'm not convinced that it's the most efficient way to do it.
Thank you for making this nuance. Professor Rathkolb, also as far as Austria, but broader is concerned, we are looking forward to also maybe recycling the conclusions of the book. What kind of lessons are to be learned in reducing authoritarian trends, and how can we strengthen parliamentary democracy in Europe?
Thank you. I think you already heard very important and also well-based arguments here. I will partly sum it up and focus it. I think what we need is, because we know from our public opinion polls for decades that education matters, also the better educated, the less authoritarian trends, and what you both have referred to, also the social issue, The lower the income, the stronger the tendency to seek a strong leader, to get a better future. And we see it right now globally, all over the world, the US, India, and I could summarize many other countries. That means, in my opinion, it's a major change in our educational approach. We are, now I'm speaking against my own university and research system. We're putting too much money to the top and completely really don't care about basic education. Yeah, we need a change of transfer of resources. Yeah, I think if we invest, yeah, and take Austria, if we invest in the kindergarten system, the primary schools, within the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of money for teachers, social workers, people who speak different languages, you will have a different Austria, yeah, after 10 years. Yeah. But, you know, that's an utopia. But right now, I think we have a new educational minister who understands this from the NEO side. Yeah. The next thing I think is very important, and it also came up, yeah, and we have a new study by the Bertelsmann Foundation on emotional and social loneliness of young people between 16 and 26 years old, yeah? And as a result of this feeling, and it goes up to 60%, yeah, of the young people, they have a tendency to stay out of politics. They became completely apathic, which, by the way, was an important tool for Orban to get to power. Yeah, we have had opinion polls in Hungary at the same time when he came back, and apathy was extremely high in Hungary. That means to really find a new way of real interaction, yeah, what you all both already have contained here, and especially focus on the regional development. I grew up in the northern part of Austria, yeah, and this part now also has become a stronghold of the Freedoms Party, yeah, because it's an unbelievable brain drain, yeah. There are no restaurants available, no jobs, yeah. And I think we have good experiences in France where there have been some regional programs. And in the moment you invest, and it's not only the money, yeah, it's the signal, yeah, you care. And unfortunately, I must say, we have become very urbanized, also in the major parties in the political decision-making. A very important point which Edith Innotai made is really also underlined by the most recent Nobel Prize for Economy with Simon Johnson and others. And they could really, based on hardcore empiric data throughout the world, document that in the end, if you really want to change the social situation in a society, you need a democracy. Look at China. For the ordinary Chinese people, this unbelievable economic growth has not changed their situation throughout China, yeah? The small elite group, yeah, and the party and the international investments, and I think the Hungarian example you get also correlate to that. That means this is something which I think has to be communicated, that authoritarian regimes and dictatorships never succeeded. Look to Italian history and so on, yeah? It was a disaster. Italy was destroyed in the end in 44, 45 as a result of Italian fascism. Full stop, yeah? The data are there. We don't have to discuss it. And I think this is an important issue. And then two very brief issues referring to the volume here. We have a study by a Chinese researcher from Princeton University, Sherry Wu, who has experiences in textile factories in China with 1,000 workers, most of them women. And as you said, 20 minutes per week, moderated discussion and within 3 months, people begin to change. Yeah, they become much more or less apathic. Yeah, the democratic attitudes are strengthened, and they work better at the same time. Yeah, and this is also something which they are now trying to build up and include. And the last also article I would like to mention here is by the former first president from the European Parliament, Othmar Karas, and who also really tries also to get a better reform on the level of the European institutions, really also to not only defend liberal values and parliamentary democracy, but also really to find a way to communicate it to a larger segment of our society. That means all political reforms should aim at the bottom, what you also have said, and not so much concentrate on the top. Yeah, and I think that's a major change also with regard to European policies.
Thank you so much for this positive and enthusiastic intervention. And it also picks my final follow-up question. So my question was, what role is there left for the European Union? But you already eloquently asked it. And that brings us also back to the House of European History that can also play a small role when school children, students, everybody passing by, reflecting on the past. History does not only serve to prevent from worse in the future, but if it happens, it's not that bad after all. The final word of this evening is for the artists, which is great. Final round of text. Sean and Sylvie, you have the floor.
Dorota Maslovska, we're good people. Yesterday, I had to cross paths with someone who had once seized an opportunity to stab me in the back. The motherfucker had done it just as I was turned away, occupied with fending off other attacks. Such a position is often tempting to those who are already at the ready. At some point, they'd visualize the motions, practice them in their thoughts, and then all that's left is waiting. People like him know you have to make your own luck. Such an exposed back screams to them, hey there, sucker, now, now. Someone with a knife in the back is overcome with melancholy, a peculiar stubborn one's cleverness paralyzed. This delayed momentum broke down into poisonous, radioactive small change within me. How unfortunately it went. Anger and contempt proudly held back were exchanged for something that, as I understood yesterday, is ordinary hatred. I had always avoided that feeling, economizing, skimping, saying I can't afford it, I don't have enough, whether out of coyness or superstitious dread or self-care, that downward-facing dog, maybe all of it, so that I could now go large. I hate this person. But no sudden moves either. This is a calm hatred that requires no applause, that knows no pride. It's patient, it's not kind. But it doesn't want anything big for itself. It's somewhat in awe of itself. This is my Google review of hate. An intense flight, but a rather low one. I give it 2 stars, the first one for the low price. It arises in the brain on its own. I wanted to try it. It's ultimately the #1 high in Poland today. Mega afterburn. It has us all flying now. We're rolling on it from morning to night. The first dose is free. The second one is free too. They're all free. We pluck it from the air just like that, from the internet, from the paper that the lady at the newsstand tosses contemptuously into our face, from the television which uses false, faked material to arouse phobias, paranoias and resentments. It's a relay. The zombie bites and then you trundle along intoxicated and debased, wanting to jump down the throat of everyone you meet. And you don't know when another zombie appears and another, and you don't know that you're already seething in a triangle of hate, a hate-filled gangbang. No one can tell who's biting whom, destroying whom, finishing them off. The important thing is that you feel this invigorating power. One feels huge. even though he's not huge. He feels important, even though he's not. Powerful, although he's powerless. Our government really comes in handy for identifying this collective need. It ensures the supply, it inspires, it encourages its use. You hesitate a bit at first, of course. You're afraid, you hold back. This is a Christian country, after all, where the last lost traveller is greeted with bread and salt, and saints appear on trees and shattered window pans, in cornflakes and kielbasa, sausage. We're good people. But there are certain limits which have long since been crossed. We're getting up of these eternally scrapped knees. The internet, of course, is eager to monetize it, offering its arenas to its endless, gloomy Olympiad. Why isn't it an Olympiad of freedom? That's what we've been fighting for so fiercely, after all. But that was like meeting the most wonderful bride awaited these centuries. It's cool that she arrived, but we somehow have nothing to talk about. She's kind of uglier than she was supposed to be, and we don't know how we fit. We're overwhelmed with agoraphobia. And it's kind of weird without that hand leading us by the nose. It was so warm and strong, and we're ready to make a mock-up of it. We're holding ourselves, squeezing ourselves, smothering and hounding and raping ourselves in complicated retrospective choreographies and cinematic remake of trauma. Call it what you like. Karma, a curse, a tumor with the metastasis of a state that proclaims Christ as its king, while taking advantage of the fact that the poor man cannot speak.
Us, by Tena Stivicic. She likes to say there is the time before and the time after. She likes to say that once upon a time people would have needed a much greater distance to be able to identify so clearly this line that delineates the time before and the time after. But we are living in this time, which keeps speeding up like a runaway train. The time before was a dark time. The time after is a time of light. And this is the key to her popular appeal. How many people are there around these days who would call our times the times of light? This is a risky move, is it not? One might be labelled one of those New Age wackos. Well, perhaps, she says, still, people are fed up of sinister prognoses, of warmings and floods and migrants, of everything familiar indomitably dissolving. People need something positive. But how does she mean? The time of light. Can this really be a time of light? There was something that an aunt living in America had said to her when she was only a little girl that defined her. There are two kinds of people, those who leave and those who stay. Her aunt worked in a boutique clothes shop and carried herself as though those clothes were her doing. Her outfits had an air of another world, unfamiliar and exciting, where everything was possible. Thin cigarettes hung suspended from her thin fingers, and her gaze suggested she knew what that beyond the horizon world held. This promise that somewhere else there are better things to be had was like a spell. It was only much later that I realized it was actually a curse. To leave, to work in fashion, wear beautiful, different, bold creations, to live a beautiful, different, bold life. What an idea! And that all alone I would be able to make my ambitions come true? Women especially fell victim to this trend. Yes, women collectively agreed to this pact of silence and tacitly adopted the party line, you can have it all. All you need to do is roll up your sleeves, plan well and ahead. The truth is, one can't have it all. But the truth is, one needn't have it all. To have it all is a male principle, driven by testosterone. To have it all is not inscribed in female biology. No, she doesn't have children, she says, because she was too late to the realization. Yes, of course, she regrets it, she says, but she takes comfort in the fact that she might be able to help many, many other women to not make the same mistake. Oh, she will always love London, she says. Naturally, how could I not love the place where the revelation took place? Yes, it is a paradox. She had to have gone there, she had to have lived there, she had to have despaired, so that she would come to understand. London is a conceptual fallacy, a 100-headed monster who eats itself. Millions of desperate people barely coping in impossible circumstances so that a small, cash-heavy elite would prosper further. It's the Tower of Babel, where too many languages prevent people from looking into each other's eyes. Men feel irrelevant to the point of killing themselves. Infertile women kill themselves working. Mold grows in their tiny flats and kills their children, and each day boatfuls of strong young men arrive at their shores. Oh, it's not like she didn't try. She tried for 2.5 decades. She tried to succeed in this fundamentally flawed system where even those who succeed find no happiness. Shouldn't all our alarm bells be going off if even the successful are in despair? This is why she came back, she says, so that she might take matters into her own hands. To do it right here, in her own community, to act locally instead of keep staring at the screen like a hypnotized robot and weep at the fate of all the earth. The world would be a better place if we all rolled up our sleeves and committed ourselves to our immediate surroundings. If we actually cared for our closest fellow human beings with true human solidarity. They say she simplifies things. They say it's manipulative. They say politics is a complex human endeavor. Sure, she says. But complex matter consists of many small and simple particles. This is all she's proposing. She's not an ambitious person, she says, nor is she power-hungry. But I cannot stay silent. To share this realization is my civic duty. I am compelled to it as a woman, a Christian, a fellow citizen, a human being. This is why she returned, she says, because here there is still hope. Because we are warmer, we are wittier, we have a soul, we've seen a lot, we have history, we know how to cope with trauma without losing our sense of humor. We have passion, we know how to laugh, how to kiss, how to touch without fear. We like to help, we like to do a favor, we like to share food, we like to treat. We are not mean. We're jolly, we're relaxed, we're reliable. We are not them. We are us. We have God on our side. We are still not lost.
Gehild Steinbuch. Cover boy. It's just an image. Stacks up, can do what we cannot. We stand around as a sluggish mass congealing in and of itself, laying itself on thick. Oh yes, yes, of course. We stand around and look at the image. Look into it until it fills us and how it fills us. It's just an image and it can do what we can't. It stacks and overlaps, flops over the right wing, but respect. You can't see neither how he got there, nor the effort it took. It looks entirely effortless. He also looks like that, unlike us. We wrestle with ourselves and are pretty exhausted. We wrestle with the language, which is pretty exhausted. He holds up the shield against it. It slides off it. He doesn't have to do anything with his relic of popular culture in his hands. There isn't anything you can do about it. The language skids along the smooth surface, rubs itself up and off, trims off a bit of itself until it is just as smooth and shiny, just as intact. It stands in the light, and the light is pretty bright and pretty glistening. He did that. Him, effortlessly, unbreakably. 10,000 volts blast out of every corner. He stands on platforms he has built himself out of wood, metal, travertine, out of unconstitutional foster fathers and general acceptance. The image shows him with a cool undercut. Hello, cover boy. Fitting too, covering and covering up, covering over and adopting, but in such a way that the fog somehow sounds like a fantastic present. The image shows him then, and in it he is looking into a future that appears clear to him, and is clear. After all, he has big plans whose real consequences he has knitted into terms, he, the philosophy graduate, who wraps his thoughts so firmly and fluffily in speech that in many places they're gladly accepted as gift for its hosts. If you have a language that needn't belong to you, that does the dirty work for you, it's not so bad after all. The image shows him, the cover boy, then, and it shows masculinity the way you imagine masculinity, and misanthropy the way you don't imagine it, the way you can imagine it. The image shows him, the cover boy, then, whose name we write, him, the head of the movement we sometimes call what it is, but usually we don't. We usually call it what he imagines it to be, how he has presented it. We write his name, write it up, name the movement, a movement even though it isn't one, write it up, write up the experience so that a bit of its glow stays with us, so that someone stays with us and is interested in our stories, which are his stories, his words. We write that he is interested in interventions that describe violence as an artistic strategy. We nevertheless provide a warning that serves as an excuse, that serves as an excuse for repeating, that serves as an excuse for the fact that his language, his idea of language, which isn't his idea at all, that this idea of language that resides somewhere within us anyway has officially taken up residence, that it is permitted to reside here. Haven't got anything to add. Constantly adding. What else remains? What awaits is ultimately unclear. Has to remain unclear, has to nestle between the copies in margin notes, footnotes, and the reverse, precisely when the future seems clear, is clear to them, is clear to our cover boy.
Thank you, House of European History, for having us this evening. Watch out and leave the house as soon as possible, unless you want to be locked up the whole night here, but not before leaving. Mentioning the book, buy it, read it. Congratulations to the editors and the authors. And please, a final round of applause for the two speakers and the three panelists. Thank you so much.